To the exploratory essay, instead of spending so much time summarizing this time, you're now going to spend more of your time analyzing your sources. And so, what's your sources? How does, especially with regards to how does the source change or reinforce your original thinking on the topic? So it's called an exploratory essay, but another term for this is called a dialectical essay. Let me explain this concept of the dialectic, and that way you guys can understand how this paper is going to function. Let me scroll down on this. So, if you take a philosophy class, this is the dialectic is kind of a philosophical idea. Hegel, the German philosopher Hegel, and also Karl Marx, both of them come up with this idea of how knowledge is constructed. Well, so basically then there's three parts to knowledge construction, which is a dialectic, the word that they used. The first part is called a thesis. So a thesis is kind of, as far as like how this project is going, your thesis was your original idea that you had before you started doing any of the research. So, like, let's say you did gun control, as a topic. You said your original idea was, we should have more stricter gun laws. And in that case, that would be your original thesis, which is going to be this paper because it's going to be structured in a certain way. Basically, your original thesis is going to compose the introduction of this next paper. Basically, you're just going to explain, this is why I chose my topic, this was how I felt about it, this is also what I hope to find out. So in the thesis, in a dialectic, this is your original idea, but you're wanting to put that idea out, you're wanting to test that idea, make sure that you're right about it. So then the next part is called the antithesis. In the antithesis, you're putting your view in tension with the other views. You also put your view in tension with similar views as yours, but maybe views that give a slightly different perspective. So basically then, you're taking all these ideas, taking your original thesis, you're taking these other views, you're kind of like making them lock horns. They're locking horns. They're rolling. The term that one of the textbooks I use uses, you're rolling in complexity. So basically, what's going to happen here in this paper, you're going to spend a section talking about 6 or 7 of your different sources. And because this is a slightly longer paper, I'm going to have you talk more about more sources than I normally do. You're going to talk about your most significant sources. So throughout the paper, it's going to get kind of messy because this is a very personal paper. It's perfectly fine to use the first person point of view and all that kind of stuff. But you're going to, as you go source by source by source through the paper, you're going to explain, well, I've now read this source. Did it change your thinking, your original way of thinking about your topic, any at all? Did it add something new, to your original way of thinking? Did it maybe change your mind about your topic in some way? Or did it only strengthen the original view that you had? But the purpose of the essay then is you're going to exhaust all of these different perspectives. You're going to test them with your original view, and then what we call the synthesis that's the idea that now emerges after the thesis and the antithesis lock horns. right? This is the new idea that you're giving birth to. The synthesis, you know, thesis plus antithesis equals synthesis, right? So how, after doing all this research, where are you now? The synthesis usually has three different ways that it can go. So you will have the way that maybe you started out thinking, I think we should have more gun laws. By the time you read all this research, you might still say, well, I still think we need stronger gun laws. But another way that you can do it, let's say you think we need stronger gun laws, and then you read all these sources that might change your mind. Hey, it's a good thing that there's plenty of guns out there, right? That would be a synthesis where, based on the evidence you read, you completely changed your mind by the end of the paper. So throughout the paper, then I'm kind of seeing the growth of your intellectual journey and how you're growing, how you're learning, how you're changing your mind, right? And another way is, of course, the kind of gray area conclusion. So maybe by the end it's not so black and white about how you feel about it. Maybe you still lean more towards one side, but you also think the other side has some valid points. Even if it's only something like, I agree with one side 51%, I agree with the other side 49%. That's kind of what a gray area synthesis would look like in that regard. So the synthesis of this paper then is the conclusion. Where are you now after finishing all this research? Normally, like I said, you would have you do an argument where you take your synthesis and then make it thesis in your fourth and final paper. But again, I don't think that's necessary. I think this is enough. So this paper then has a clear structure. You have your introduction, which is your thesis, the thesis in the dialectical sense. So why did you choose the topic? What were your initial biases? What did you hope to gain or learn from doing a process of research? And then basically through the paper, it's going to take a very cookie cutter approach. So you're just going to talk about all your different sources. So you start out talking about your first source. So you always want to give some kind of context. What's the name of the source? Who's the author of the source? And then spend the main difference between annotated bib and exploratory essay is annotated bib was mostly about summarizing it. Exploratory essay is more about analyzing it. So you do want to spend a sentence or two explaining what the source is about, what the arguments were. But most of what I'm looking for in this paper then is your evaluation. Think about this third paper like it's a bunch of mini strong responses. Remember how August Tannen, you had a strong response? Think about this paper like it's a group of many strong responses. So you sum up the article, what it's about, then you're going to spend most of your time saying, well, here's what I gained from reading this source. Here's how this source is changing. Here's how my ideas are growing and evolving as based off of the source I read. So basically, you're just going to do this in a very kind of clear format. You're just going to go source by source by source as you go through it. I think to get to the 6 to 8 pages, you'll probably need to do about 6 or 7 of your sources. You won't need to do all of them, but most of them. That's one reason why it's important to do a good job on the bib, right? That way you have a wide variety of sources to pick from. You're just going to go basically source by source by source. As you go, don't forget about what you have written above. As you go, ideally, the essay gets more complicated. So like I say here for source B, after reading source A, you might say I asked another question leading to source B. So as you go through the paper, maybe your source A is something I wrote, maybe source D is something, Bob wrote. You can feel free to keep mentioning source A when you get to source D, right? So ideally, you're putting all these different arguments, you're putting them in conversation with each other. You're also engaging yourself. How do you see your ideas evolving and growing as you keep going? And then the end of the paper, just ignore this schedule that I have on this prompt. But the end of the paper is the conclusion synthesis. So, doing all this research, this is where I am now. Basically, a good exploratory essay, it works. After all this stuff up here, the conclusion and synthesis is then obvious, right? If you spend, let's say, for instance, if you do the gun control, let's say you think we need more laws, so the synthesis stays the same as the thesis. You say you need more laws, but then up above here, you're saying a bunch that maybe we don't need more laws. That's contradictory, right? So usually when these papers go wrong is when there's a bunch of contradictions inherent here. So there's no, besides just the source by source by source approach, there's no real way to organize this paper. It's supposed to be messy in the sense that you're putting all these ideas in tension with each other. This is what, at the end of the paper, here's how I now feel. This is very personal paper. It's about your growth. So basically, the best advice I can give you then is don't outline this paper. And that's something that writing teachers usually never say. Don't outline it. Just sit down, write the thing, see how it grows and evolves as you keep writing it. Right? So that's roll in the mess. Embrace the mess that is this paper, so to speak. Basically everything I covered, thesis, antithesis, synthesis here up above. The deadline for this, Friday, April 19th, 11:59. That gives us another week or two past that date for me to grade these, as well as for you guys to work on your finals. So next week, the week of April 12th, or April 8th through 12th, I'm going to ask you to do 2 check-ins. The first check-in, I'm actually going to have you guys read over some student examples. And you're then going to respond to those examples on the discussion board. So remember, you want to take this response seriously. You want to really get involved with it. I'll give you some directions for that. The second check-in, so let's say that April 12th is on a Friday. On that Friday, going into the next week at some point, post your introduction and then respond to some other introductions. I'm going to be looking at those closely. Then the week of the 15th through the 19th, that's going to be the paper writing week. So at some point before the Wednesday, the 17th, post the paper post your draft to the discussion board. Doesn't have to be a full draft. Even then, respond, right? That way it gives the person 2 days or so to implement the feedback. So that's the timeline. That's the paper. And so anytime over the next week or so, if you guys have questions, let me know. It's what I'm here for. I'll also post a book chapter from a textbook that explains this essay too. That way you'll have that to supplement what I just said. You'll have examples to go from. That's why I'm having you read examples. And so hopefully I'm giving you guys enough material. Sometime over the next week or so, don't hesitate to let me know how I can help. Remember, to do this paper well, you need to get that bibliography right first. Work on that first as we're reading examples and all that stuff. Work on the bibliography first, get it right. Then that'll help you do this. Till next time, you guys take care.